Lisa Frankenstein is now out playing in theaters.
What the hell is even that?
A coming-of-age love story about a teenager and her crush who happens to be a corpse. After a set of horrific circumstances bring him back to life, the two embark on a journey to find love, happiness, and a few missing body parts. Alright, so full transparency, I do not know if I'm going to recommend this movie. Sitting here starting to film this review, I still have not made up my mind whether I'm going to recommend this movie, because this movie is such a mixed bag in my mind. The positives and the negatives are almost interwoven in my mind. They cross over so much. So I'm just going to try to untangle this thing as my review comes out. So let's talk about what I think is at least the best part of this movie, and that's got to go to the production design as well as the cast. Because this movie takes place in the late 80s, and the set design, the set dressing, the production design, all of it does so much to immerse you in the environment of the 80s. Puts you right back into that decade. The entire style of this movie stands out so much. It is filled with vibrant neon colors and gothic aesthetic throughout the entire runtime. It is beautiful to look at from beginning to end. Along with that comes the costuming and the wardrobe, especially as the film goes on and the character of Lisa starts to get into her style a bit more. The costume designs and the stuff they have her wearing, it was so much fun and it looked awesome on screen. It would make Winona Ryder from Beetlejuice very proud. Going on to the cast, another bright spot of this movie was Kathryn Newton as Lisa. She brings so much attitude and spunk and layers to this character. She actually makes this a pretty memorable character, even if I have some problems with how the character is written, but we'll get into that a little bit later. Regardless of those issues, I thought that whenever she was on screen, she did an excellent job and always held my attention. Alongside Kathryn Newton, you got Cole Sprouse playing our undead zombie figure here who's come back from the dead to be with Lisa. And I gotta admit, I know Cole Sprouse has been on the big screen before, but it was pretty cool to see Cole Sprouse in a theater taking on a role like this. I've been watching him since Big Daddy to Sweet Life of Zack and Cody to Sweet Life on Deck to Sweet Life on Dead. As the title suggests, his performance reflects that of Frankenstein's monster, even though this movie, even being called Lisa Frankenstein, has nothing to do with Frankenstein. Lisa is not a scientist. There's no scientist figure in this movie that brings Cole Sprouse back. You're not going to hear anyone yell, "He's alive!" There's nothing like that in this movie. Nothing to do with Frankenstein. Which I'm not going to lie was a little bit of a surprise to me, but Cole Sprouse, he clearly adapted some mannerisms and traits of Frankenstein's monster into his performance, but he also was able to make the zombie performance his own. It didn't feel like he was doing a Frankenstein impersonation. Through a series of grunts and nothing but his body language, he does a lot with very little to work with, and his comedic timing in this movie is some of the best I've seen him accomplish in his career. I also want to give a shout out to Liza Soberano, who plays Lisa's stepsister in the movie. I feel like her performance is going to get overlooked, but honestly, she was one of my favorite parts of the entire movie. With her bubbly personality and earnestness in wanting to bond with Lisa as sisters while also having to deliver emotional scenes that were both funny and tragic at the same time, her character has it the roughest out of everyone in the movie, and I thought she absolutely killed it with everything that she was asked to do through this performance. But other than those things, I felt like Lisa Frankenstein came with a multitude of problems that did hinder my enjoyment of the movie overall. For starters, I found the pacing in this movie to be very uneven. For a long period of time, nothing really happens in this movie. It takes like 40 minutes for us to even get to the central plot of Lisa and the creature going to kill people for their body parts to help restore Cole Sprouse's zombie back to life. But even when that starts to happen, it comes and goes so frequently, it's almost like an afterthought of the movie that it's really hard to say that that is what the movie is about. Because in reality, I feel like that's about 15% of this movie. At its core, this is a dark comedy. This is a horror comedy, and I just personally didn't find it all that funny for the majority of its runtime. And comedy is the hardest thing to critique because it's so subjective. Anything that I find funny, you might not find funny, and vice versa. But for me, I found that a lot of these scenes just played very awkwardly through their direction, and I found the editing to be very choppy to the point that there's really no transition from scenes to scenes. Each scene just kind of starts and ends very abruptly. It's very harsh with the cut. And it just kind of gives this movie an amateur type feel. Now, this is a directorial debut by Zelda Williams, so I don't want to knock on her too much because there's clearly potential with her directing through this movie. I mean, like I said, the movie looks great, and there are some scenes that I thought did have a lot of energy and did have some creativity and originality to the way that they were put together. But there was also a lot of roughness around the edges that I just couldn't help but see. Now, that's not to say that this movie never made me laugh because, oh boy, would that be a lie. There are some outlandish and just straight out bonkers moments in this movie that had me howling in the theater. I was laughing in this movie a couple times more than I've ever laughed in a theater in my life. It also helped that I had like a private screening to this movie because no one else was in there. So I just let it out, man. I was jumping up and down at parts in this movie. My jaw was on the floor with some of the stuff I was seeing them do in this movie. However, a lot of those laugh out loud moments were pretty far and few between, and the bonkers scenes that had me incredibly entertained are more so near the end of the movie, or were just too sparse throughout the first two acts, and I just wish that there were more of those types of scenes throughout the rest of the movie, because when this movie was falling flat in their comedy, there wasn't really much else that I found to latch onto with this movie. I found the story here to be pretty messy, and this movie is silly, it is over the top, and it knows it, and it embraces it to the point that they really don't feel the need to explain anything to the audience. You're just kind of expected to go with it, and for that reason, things like why Cole Sprouse' zombie comes back in the first place, never explained. Who he is, never explained. His backstory, never really explained. How can a tanning bed suddenly attach different body parts to his body and make him more alive? Never explained. They don't really take the time to explore any of that. And there's a lot of things that I found like that in the plotting of this movie. A lot of things just start and stop without any follow-up or conclusion or even consequences. Which again, I could probably overlook if the movie was funnier. I mean, overall, it is a dark comedy, so its real job is to just make me laugh. Or maybe the movie can make up for it by diving more into its romance story. But the thing is that this movie isn't really a romance movie. If anything, this movie is trying to deconstruct what a teenage romance movie is, which in some ways I appreciate, but in other ways I just thought that it hurt the movie more than it benefited it for me. There are very few scenes here that are shared between Sprouse and Newton, and when there are scenes with the two of them, they feel oddly short and rushed. And I think one of the big reasons for that is because the movie never really does take the time to develop the pair's relationship as a couple. For the majority of the movie, Sprouse's zombie is just tucked away in Lisa's bedroom closet, so you don't even really get the fun of seeing him interact with any of the other characters very much. And Lisa seems more interested in using Sprouse's zombie as her own personal Walking Dead diary than she is as a romantic partner. I mean, for a majority of the movie, she's not even interested in him, so it makes any of the sequences that are supposed to have sexual tension just kind of fall flat on their face for me. And when this movie does decide that, okay, they're a couple now, it just always felt so forced to me. It never felt earned or developed. Which brings me to one of the biggest problems I had with this movie, and that is the character Lisa. Because while I enjoyed Kathryn Newton's performance as Lisa, the character herself I felt was written all over the place. It felt like the writers were taking the character and making her fit into the scenes that they needed her to fit into, as opposed to putting her into scenes and having the character react the way that they would in that situation. And in that way, it just felt like this character was constantly shifting gears to whatever the writers needed her to be, with no development, no build-up, and no explanation. And nowhere was this more apparent than when the character decides to go on the murdering spree to get body parts for Cole Sprouse's zombie. There is no explanation or build-up as to why this character is suddenly okay being a cold-blooded murderer. It just felt like the writers were like, well, we need her to be okay with murder, so now she is. I mean, yes, the character, when you meet her, is she gothic? Yes. A little weird? Sure. Dark? For sure. But murder? That felt like a huge stretch to me that the writing just took the laziest route possible to get her there. And they established this character with a backstory to the point that murder should be the last thing that she's cool with. And the writers do this with this character constantly. If she needs to be this way, she's suddenly this way. If she needs to be the other way, she's suddenly the other way. There's no arc, there's no transition, she just is. It honestly caused me viewer whiplash, and it also got a little bit infuriating to me. And yet, with these mixed emotions and complicated feelings coming out of the movie theater, something has happened over these couple of days, and that is that Lisa Frankenstein has really stuck with me. For better or worse, I gotta say, this movie really did leave an impression, and I think the reason it did is because this movie is so unapologetic in its style, its characters, its sense of humor. This movie feels like it shows up in your face and says, yeah, this is me, deal with it. And there's honestly something about this movie having such a unique style and being so unapologetically this movie, Zelda Williams' unique vision for this movie, that actually gives a certain charm to it. In the end, look, I am still incredibly torn on this movie. There's a lot in its storytelling and its structure that I honestly think is just straight up bad. Yet it is so fresh and original, and I can't ignore the moments that did have me laughing out loud in the theater. Even though the whole movie wasn't this riot of a time and I have a lot of issues with it, those moments of laughter created moments of joy. And in the end, when I look back on this experience of Lisa Frankenstein, I am glad that I saw it, for better or worse. And for that reason, I'm going to give Lisa Frankenstein a weak recommend. I do think there are some moments in this movie, looking back on the film, that were worth the time going out to see it. But now I want to hear from you guys. What did you think of Lisa Frankenstein? Look, regardless of how I felt, this movie is definitely going to find an audience. I could definitely see this being a cult classic in the near future. And you know what? I'm probably going to watch it again from time to time in the future as well. Comment down below and let me know all your thoughts and opinions on this, guys. And if you're new here and you haven't heard, we have a goal on this channel. We want to hit 4,000 subscribers before the end of the year. If you like talking movies, if you like talking about Lisa Frankenstein, Diablo Cody, and more, we do that all the time over on this channel. Consider hitting that subscribe button before you make your way out. We'd love to have you join our little community over here. As always, guys, thank you so much for hearing me out, and I hope to talk to you guys again real soon.